Cool. We're going to get going. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Chappell. I am the Conservation and Brewshed Program Manager over at Washington Wild. We're so excited to have all of you join us to celebrate this monumental victory for conservation in our country. So we've got a really awesome lineup of speakers today. Tom Muniak, with the Executive Director of Washington Wild. Sara Nelson with Fremont Brewing Company is joining us. Christine Mahler of the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Coalition, and then Rob Smith of National Parks Conservation Association. So a couple housekeeping things. So we will be doing a Q&A at the end, so feel free to leave a question in the chat box if you have any burning questions about the Great American Outdoors Act or anything else, conservation related. Yeah, so we're gonna start off with a quick video about Washington Wild, and then we'll jump into the meat of it.
On a September evening in 1979, a handful of conservation activists On a September evening in 1979, a handful of conservation activists met at the College Inn in Seattle's University District. Hours later, a new organization was born, Washington Wilderness Coalition.
So I've lived in Washington State for 30 years, and it is a diverse state in that it has the Pacific Ocean, mountains, rainforests, deserts, lakes, rivers. Washington Wild is a local organization that protects all of that for all of us. And that is why I'm a proud volunteer for the Washington Wild organization.
Today known as Washington Wild, over the past 40 years, the organization has led efforts to protect nearly 3 million acres of designated wilderness throughout Washington State.
I'm Yvonne Krause. I'm the Executive Director of the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. We as mountain bikers have been working with Washington Wild on a very unique challenge of wanting to support wilderness and supporting that in Washington State, and at the same time losing access when we do so. So it's a unique challenge for us as mountain bikers. It's a very rare partnership with Washington Wild. We've been able to make that happen together, looking at wilderness boundaries, looking at trail alignments, looking at what gives us the best access for both mountain bikers and resource protection. It's very unique. It's been a very treasured partnership, and I look forward to that partnership for 40 more years.
Washington Wild brings people together in the vigorous defense of our remaining ancient forests, free-flowing rivers, wildlife habitat, and clean air and water.
My name is Brian Cladisby, chairman of the Swinomish tribe, and when Swinomish partnered with Washington Wild, we knew it was going to be a good fit to oppose this mining in the headwaters of the Skagit River, which is the only one in the lower 48 that still has every species of wild salmon still spawning in its tributaries. And in 7 generations, our kids need to be standing here telling the same story to those that need to know.
While much has changed over the past 40 years, our national parks, forests, and other public lands are under increasing threats from unregulated mining, new dam construction, and other development.
You must have good quality water to make good quality beer. Being a craft brewer, and a fairly small craft brewer compared to the big breweries, we're reliant on producing a quality, consistent product. So locally, we try and do a lot to keep our river clean and pure. And working with Washington Wild, it just helps to expand that throughout the state to keep our natural resources pure. And as a brewery, it's just so important.
Key to their success is building powerful grassroots networks and winning coalitions around protecting our public lands and wild places.
The mission of Washington Wild to make sure that we preserve low areas where families can have access and for salmon spawning is really critical over the coming 50 years, because that's the kind of wilderness that we will be able to use for generations to come. Washington Wild does a great job that's very unique. It brings together communities, different partnerships to be able to establish the road to get wilderness through Congress. It's not easy to pass legislation. You have to bring people in a community together, different organizations, bring together a whole coalition of people to get the kind of energy to get legislation through Congress. That's what Washington Wild does uniquely and very well.
Join me in supporting Washington Wild's leadership in protecting and defending our local wild lands and waters today and for the next 40 years.
Awesome. I hope you all enjoyed that short video. So next up, we're going to hear from our Executive Director, Tom Muniak, and then watch a quick thank you video before we start hearing from our speakers. So Tom, you want to take it away?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Chris, and thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. So yeah, we're here to actually do two things. One is celebrate like a big conservation victory, which sometimes our community kind of forgets to do. So we're not going to do that tonight. And yeah, really then learn about what that means for here and locally in Washington State. And the victory we're talking about is, of course, the American Great Outdoors Act, which actually was signed by the president after passing both houses of Congress earlier this month. And this really has two really big pieces of it that are really important for all of us that care about the outdoors. The one is it actually fully funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a fund that takes royalties from oil and gas, offshore oil and gas drilling, and reinvests them into conservation and recreation priorities. This supports like our national parks and forests and other public lands. It also it supports a smaller kind of local like ball fields and rec centers and things like that. So it's a really, really relevant piece of legislation and funding that kind of touches most of all of us. The other piece is that there was funding in this for actually the considerable backlog in our national parks for road maintenance and other types of things that just hasn't been funded, and that is a big deal as well. This was really strongly supported by a bipartisan group of legislators around the country, and in particular in our congressional delegation, a lot of support from our senators and representatives as well. So I think next we're going to show a kind of short video that was just put together. It's kind of hot off the press with a number of different folks thanking our congressional representatives for voting for this. And you'll be seeing this in social media and today and going forward as well. So Chris, if you want to roll that, that'd be great.
When we invest in conservation, we invest in Washington's future. Washington's outdoor community thanks our congressional delegation for passing the Great American Outdoors Act.
The Great American Outdoors Act will surely protect our wildlife populations and our sacred natural resources for generations to come.
Thank you for providing full and permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. What a big win for Washington State.
On behalf of REI and our 18 million members, thank you so much for passing the Great American Outdoors Act. We need the outdoors more than ever right now.
Community garden like this, playground and green space is very important for the communities we serve. The Great American Outdoor Act will increase access to outdoor space and make outdoor more equitable for all.
Great American Outdoors Act lets us go outside and enjoy nature. Thanks! Thank you, Congressman Kilmer, for saving Olympic forests like this one, for my family's 3 generations, and for so many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, our parks and public lands are now protected for decades to come.
The 14,000 members of the Mountaineers thank you for restoring wild places by passing the Great American Outdoors Act.
Outdoor recreation and exploring nature, that's a way of life for us in north central Washington and a huge pillar of our economy. We're thrilled about the positive impacts the Great American Outdoors Act will have here.
Thanks to the Great American Outdoors Act, parks like Gasworks will be protected for future generations to come.
Thank you for helping us to conserve a landscape of working forest land, wildlife habitat at Mount St. Helens, at Mount Adams, throughout the Columbia River region with your support. Thank you.
America's Great Outdoors Act will ensure that our parks, forests, and other public lands are protected and continue to provide conservation and recreation benefits for all of us.
And for future generations like us.
On behalf of hunters and anglers, I can't thank you enough for supporting our Washington outdoors.
Thank you for everything you do and continue to do. We can't do it without you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Senator Murray.
Thank you, Congresswoman Del Bene.
Thank you, Congressman Larson.
Thank you, Representative Herrera Butler.
Thank you to Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal.
Thank you, Congresswoman Schreier.
Thank you, Congressman Smith.
Thank you, Congressman Heck.
Thanks to your efforts, Washington residents, communities, visitors, and businesses will benefit for years to come. You've made Washington proud.
All right. Thanks for running that. So let's get started with our program. So the first guest we're happy to have on is Sara Nelson. Sara is co-owner of Fremont Brewing, which I think many of us know and love, and also Fremont's a member of the Washington Wild's Brewshed Alliance. And Sara's no stranger to the Lwcf issue, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. She's been out to DC lobbying to support that over the last few years, more than once. And so with that, she's going to help us kick off and celebrate this big victory. So Sara, take it away. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I always say I'm not going to be that person, but then I'm always that person. Anyway. Hi, everyone. You know, there's not a lot to be happy for these days. So for this happy hour, we've got a lot to be happy for. So I'm Sara Nelson, co-owner, founder of Fremont Brewing. We've been members of the Brewshed Alliance since, I don't know, whenever they made us do that. No, from the very beginning that we've been a brewery. So I don't know, 2009, 2010. You've probably heard me say this before if you've ever seen me on anything, but I always say, no water, no beer. And so brewers have a vested interest in making sure that our sources of water are clean. It has everything to do with taste and also the amount of chemicals breweries across the country have to put into their water to make it possible to use in beer. So this is, it's very important for brewers. Most importantly though, this is great for anybody experiencing the outdoors or who relies on agriculture, etc. As Tom said, I did go to DC and lobby in support of Cantwell's effort. She's been a leader on this issue for a long time. She generated a bipartisan coalition to make this thing actually come to pass. And I have to say, hats off to her dogged work on this over many years. So thank you very much, Senator Cantwell, and of course, Senator Murray, and our whole delegation. And my new one, Jayapal. So I'm in the 43rd and the first. Anyway, or 7th. So what I would like to do is just, start off this happy hour with a little bit of a toast. I'm opening a summer because it's summer, and I hail from Camino Island, and I would just like to crack a beer and say cheers to everyone in this effort. Thank you everybody for doing this. It's great for Washington, it's great for the United States, and You got to count the victories while they happen and raise a glass or a can. Cheers.
All right, thank you. That's great. So let's start a program. We have two really great speakers that can kind of talk to us about what this actually means for Washington State. This is obviously a national, program, national funding. Our first guest speaker is somebody who's kind of in the middle of all of the Land and Water Conservation Fund work. Christine Mahler is the executive director of the Washington Wildlife Recreation Coalition. This is a really diverse group of leaders that are focused on our public lands and providing all the benefits that our public lands give us, whether it's clean water, fish and wildlife, recreational health. So with that, I'll let Christine take the floor and talk about what this land and water conservation funding is going to mean here in Washington State.
Thanks so much, Tom. I just want to begin my remarks today by recognizing that I'm zooming in from West Seattle today, and I'm on the land of the Duwamish and the Coast Salish people. This land and all the land I'm going to be talking about today is occupied land. And there is some dissonance when we talk about public lands, as Native people were actively removed from these lands as part of the process of protecting them. I don't have the answer to that dissonance, but it is something that I did want to acknowledge before I continued. So as Tom noted, the Great American Outdoors Act included full permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF. This fund was created in 1964 thanks to Washington's own Senator Henry Scoop Jackson. And as Tom mentioned, it puts revenues from offshore oil and gas leases and puts them back to work to restore and protect wild places and to help all Americans get outdoors, whether that's close to home in city parks or in more remote locations. When the LWCF was created, it was authorized to spend up to $900 million each year all across the country. But in practice, Congress shifted those funds around, typically authorizing only about half that amount. Now, with the passage of the GAOA, the fund will actually receive full funding going forward, which is more important than ever in this difficult economy. An analysis of the LWCF projects all across the country was done by the Trust for Public Lands, and they found that for every $1 invested into these projects, $4 was created in economic returns. That's a return that will further boost Washington's $26.5 billion outdoor recreation economy and the 264,000 jobs it supports. That's more jobs than tech or aerospace, so we're talking about a big portion of our state. But remember that these aren't tax dollars. These are simply funds that are now going to be spent as they were promised all those years ago. So I've been throwing a lot of numbers at you, and I want to give you a better idea of what the projects this funding will actually make possible are. So take a little trip with me down to South Park, Seattle. This is a South Seattle neighborhood that's been called scruffy and blue collar and on the rise by the New York Times. But those a bit more familiar with the neighborhood would also point out that it's geographically isolated, low income, and home to a very diverse majority Latinx population. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that it's also home to a major Superfund site due to the industrial pollution in the Duwamish. But to those that live here, it's a vibrant, welcoming community. It's a community with regular community festivals and celebrations, or at least it was in the before times. It's also a community that came together to feed kids as COVID hit and free and reduced school lunches became a thing of the past. It's a community that stepped up to translate pandemic guidelines into Somali, Khmer, Spanish, and Vietnamese so that their neighbors would have that critical information. It's also a community that frankly needs the mental and physical health benefits of outdoor recreation. Mind you, South Park does have a park, but it is old. The baseball field is rutted and worn and really doesn't serve terribly well for a community that would honestly prefer a game of soccer to baseball. The aging playground and wading pool are hidden behind a building in a dark corner, practically invisible from the main road, but right next to a busy, loud highway. But even so, this park is their gathering place. It's the destination of the annual Fiestas Patrias parade and more. And right now, it's a common ground for distributing free food and other resources. But this space can certainly serve the community better, and it will once the LWCF funded renovation is done. They'll have multiple soccer fields, a playground and splash pad front and center, along with some outdoor workout equipment for kids and adults alike. The park will remain the heart of the community, but it will be an even stronger one. But it's not just urban parks in Seattle that LWCF will help. It also provides funding to smaller communities like Othello, Washington, over in Eastern Washington. They have a proposed LWCF project this year to develop what they're calling Pride Rock Playground, a new destination outdoor recreation area in their existing Lions Park. It will replace unsafe 1950s era equipment with a new accessible playground and other updated facilities to provide shade and comfort during those hot central Washington summers. But wait, there's still more. LWCF also helps fund our national parks and federal and state agencies to help purchase new land for recreation and habitat. It's often used to purchase land adjacent to current parks and habitat areas, or even privately owned land within the boundaries of parks. For example, in 2010, thanks to LWCF funding, the National Park Service purchased 440 acres of land along the Carbon River Road outside Mount Rainier, one of the main routes to the park from the Seattle area. The old road used to wash out frequently, and this purchase expanded the northwest boundary of the park, allowing them to move facilities and parking and to reduce ongoing maintenance costs. So whether it's close to home parks and trails or vacation destinations further abroad, LWCF provides places for all Washingtonians to enjoy hiking, camping, picnicking, hunting, wildlife viewing, and much more. That's all. Now, all that's left for us is to inspire our Washington state legislature to follow in Congress's footsteps with bipartisan support for robust funding for our stateside programs, such as the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, which is the main focus of the WWRC, which I run. And that program leverages and expands upon this funding from DC. So hopefully we can make that happen next year. Thanks so much, Tom.
All right. Hey, thank you. That was really great presentation, showing really the kind of the local impact of these funds. Next, we're going to hear from Rob Smith. Rob is the regional director for the National Parks Conservation Association, which is a national organization, and Rob covers kind of the Pacific Northwest, and he's going to talk about the funding in this America's Great Outdoors Act, which is focused on our national parks. So, Rob, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Tom. Hello, everybody. As Tom mentioned, I work for National Parks Conservation Association, also sometimes known as NPCA. We're almost as old as the Park Service, but the story of funding parks goes back a lot further than that. Let's cue up the first slide here with Yellowstone. When Yellowstone was created, our first national park in the 1870s, that was before there was even a National Park Service. And interestingly, there was no money allocated for the first several years. And they didn't get funding until several years later, 1879. And only then it was $10,000, which did go a lot further then. But ever since then, the parks have America's Best Idea has struggled for even moderate amounts of funding. Okay, next. A couple generations later, and after the end of World War II, when Americans' economy boomed, everyone came home, everyone wanted to get out, they had automobiles, they started flooding the national parks, and there was a real concern they were being loved to death. So much so that Bernard DeVoto, who is actually a big parks and public lands advocate, wrote this in Harper's Magazine in 1953, "Let's close the national parks," and it was tongue-in-cheek. But it was a call to action. And you can see a picture in there, a little grainy because it's old, but that's sunrise up in Mount Rainier. And you can see cars double parked on the grass. You can see picnic tables. I don't see a lot of restrooms there. People are camping, it's day use, it's perhaps hiking, and just finding a parking area. You can see that it's just really overrun. So something needed to be done, and this was one of those calls to Congress to act, and they did in fact act with a major investment in the parks. Next. It was called Mission 66, and it was a 10-year program ending in 1966 to mark the 50th anniversary of the National Park Service. And this is one of the results. It was creating access and facilities so more people could visit the national parks. This is opening day on the Stevens Canyon Road, which is between Paradise and Ohanapakash up in Mount Rainier. Looks like a gravel road there. It's been paved since, but this was one way of making parks open to people, and this was part of that big investment in parks that Congress made at the time. But let's look ahead now, next. Same road, a little bit different place. If you may recognize it as the bridge over the Nisqually River looking up at Mount Rainier. But that road that was first gravel, then paved, is showing signs of wear. And this is typical of many of the roads and many of the other facilities you can see in national parks. It's been a chronic underfunding of the parks, enough to keep the gates open, but not enough to actually repair and replace all the things that are getting used as even more and more people are going to parks. Let's look at the next picture. Here's Olympic National Park, and sometimes things are what you can't see or don't see very much. Everyone can see the out of order sign at the water fountain at the Hoh Visitor Center, but what you don't see is an ancient, maybe 40-year-old water system for wastewater and just drinking water, the pipes under the ground, the treatment facilities. As more and more people come, they start using these up, and just like you would take care of your house, some of these systems need to be renewed, and that's really a big ticket item at Olympic. You can also see the coast, on the coast trail, in order to help stem some of the erosion, because they only get to 70% of their trails in a year. They don't have enough money to go to all of them and keep them up. They put in what's called a sand ladder, but even this temporary fix of a sand ladder itself needs repair. And this is to serve people that want to really get out into the wilderness. Let's look at the next picture. We've organized, as others have, volunteers to help build trails, as we're doing here at Eby's Landing, in this case with military veterans and active duty and youth and the Park Service. You know, we can build trails, we can clear brush, we can paint things as volunteers, but there's some things you can't do on just a Saturday with amateurs, and we're standing in front of one of those needs. You can see the Park Service has inherited a barn, but it needs to be fixed up so it can actually be used. And that's why we tried to use this opportunity to make a pitch to Congress to do their part too, to fund the Park Service and create jobs and do the work that really needs to be done to put things back in shape. Okay, let's look at the next one. Will take us out to Olympic National Park. With some money, here's what can be done. On the left, you see a trail up to Hurricane Hill. You can see an old trail that's a crumbling pavement. You can see how people have gone around it, created another trail. That's now been replaced. As of about a week ago, the work is done. It's taken a couple years, and now you can see a nice all-weather and accessible trail for everyone to use at Hurricane Hill. That's the kind of project that the parks do that shows you how well the money can be spent, but it's just one of many things that need to be done. They can find a few $100,000 here and there, but when it comes to, say, $150 million backlog of needed repairs at Olympic National Park alone, you can only get to so much of that a year. Let's take a look at the next one to bring us back home. So this is sunrise a few days ago in the afternoon. You can see it remains popular, a lot of crowds. There have been some buildings put in, but check out that row of biffies there. The temporary johns show that there's still a need for some major facilities and renovation there, so people can take care of themselves. They have a place to park, a safe place to walk, and there's still a lot of people coming to Mount Rainier. So there's still work to be done, and that's really where, let's go to the next one, the Great American Outdoors Act comes in. And that's why we joined Washington Wild and many other groups here on saying thank you. And I wanted to say in particular, call out Senator Cantwell for her work on the Land and Water Conservation Fund so we can purchase parks and open space for the future, and also Congressman Kilmer for his leadership on the House. These are national leaders. Congressman Kilmer in particular focused on the National Park backlog funding piece of that. Together, they were able to put it together into a package that almost everyone on the delegation supported, east and west, north and south. And hopefully you can see why. So thanks for the chance to talk about the importance of the parks, and hope we can get out there this weekend or in the weeks to come.
Great. Well, thanks, Rob. That was both two great presentations. We're running up just against our 6:30, but we did want to, stick around for a few minutes to see if folks on the call had any questions. You can type those in the chat, and Chris can kind of read them out, and we can direct them to our panel. So, Chris, if you had any already, feel free to direct any of those questions to our panelists.
Yeah, so we have a question. What are some of the best known examples of public lands that were supported by LWCF funding? And any of our panelists can jump in.
Well, I think a couple that are especially well known would be Olympic National Park and Mount Rainier. They have received significant funding for those inholdings, those pockets of private property within the park and adjacent properties as well. Other more local projects would include Gasworks Park here in Seattle, received funding, Spokane's Centennial Trail as well. Those are a handful. The Columbia River Gorge has also received funding, and a lot along the Yakima watershed as well.
Great. Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
No, one example in the northwest corner of Mount Rainier is purchasing some land near the Carbon River entrance. That's a need the park had in order to create some camping and trailhead access. So purchasing land to help the Park Service buy the private land that's inside it or add to its holdings is one of the most important things that Land and Water Conservation Fund does on the federal side.
Awesome. Well, I think that was our only question, so we'll wrap it up here. But I want to give a really big thank you to Sara and Christine and Rob, and also to our friends over at the Mountaineers who put together that awesome thank you video to our delegation. Thank you all for joining us. Cheers again to the Great American Outdoors Act. Really such a great win during this chaotic time in our history. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. We'll have the video up online so you can view it again if you like, and have a great evening. Stay safe.